Mi gente, you already know who it is. It's Danny Limelight. And I need all of you to subscribe to According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and all other platforms.
I don't know what happened to our host with the most here. I'm James Kincaid. I'm being told that I am live right now. I'm going to pop out of the studio though and see if we can get our host back.
You gotta love live streams because apparently I lost myself. But hey guys, this is According to Woods, and I will have the pleasure of having none other than United Wrestling Network commentator and lover of many things, the one and only Bimbo Jimbo, James Kincaid. James, how are you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. By the way, I love the intro with Danny Limelight. He's one of my favorites going right now in pro wrestling. So he's just got a tremendous amount of talent. So it was cool to see him there. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
The pleasure is all mine. And I figured you and Danny might have had a dalliance or two on Primetime TV or the United Wrestling Network's Primetime Live. So you, essentially, Danny Limelight was my professional wrestler of the year because it wasn't just in United Wrestling Network. It wasn't just Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. He basically made his AEW debut, and that is not even including all the stuff that he and his daughter are doing in entertainment. So he's my wrestler of the year.
I think that's a tremendous pick. And the Bodega, him and Papo Esco, winning the tag team titles on Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. And that's one of my favorite tag teams. All the vignettes that they do, the catchphrase, you can get anything you need, including a beatdown, or, hey, Papo, are you hungry? Starving. It's all working. So some special stuff with the Bodega and Danny Limelight. So that's a great pick.
Thank you, good sir. And that guy is a friend of the show, so shout out to Danny Limelight, my man. But shout out to you because, you're doing so many things. Things with Golden State Warriors, the aforementioned United Wrestling Network's Primetime Live that can be viewed right and exclusively on Fight TV, FITE. Dude, how did you get your start?
Well, that's a great question. So I got bit by the pro wrestling bug at a very early age in terms of just being a fan and being enthralled with it. So, and I always sort of knew pretty early on too that I wanted to do something in broadcasting because as athletic ability waved sort of sayonara to me pretty early on, I was like, I want to still do something. I feel like I'm pretty conversant about this. And I grew up listening to sports talk radio and various other, actually old time radio too, like the Shadow Radio Pulp serials. So storytelling through broadcasting has always been something that I've sort of gravitated towards. And so I decided pretty early on that I wanted to do something in sports broadcasting. So I went to San Francisco State University and got my degree in radio and television there. And it was hard after graduating, though. I'm not gonna lie. It's not an easy industry to break into. And I graduated in 2009 when the economy had sort of really tanked and things were tough. So my sort of story and how I got into it, I'll go on an aside here. Apologies for being long-winded, but there was a news station, a news and sports station, that TV that I had been interning for a while up here, and I had been brought in for this interview to become an assistant producer for one of the post game shows and stuff that they were doing. And the sports guys loved me. I'd been working with them for a while, so they're like, "Yeah, you'll be great. We'll get you trained up. You're hired." Like all this stuff, Essentially, I was like, "Sweet, it's my foot in the door," because I was bartending at the time. So that's what I did right out of college. Is I went back into the restaurant industry, which is what I grew up in. But I was like so stoked, and I remember, requesting off all the shifts that I needed for this post game show because it wasn't a full time gig; it was a part time thing. So I was still going to bartend and everything on the side. And I remember this so vividly. I was on my way down to visit a friend of mine in San Luis Obispo to celebrate my first, real gig in broadcasting. Very excited. And I got a call, and on the other line was somebody from corporate of that TV station. They said, we understand that you've been told, one thing about this job, but, they actually don't make hiring decisions. We at corporate do, and we've decided to go in another direction. Major gut punch for me. And what it turned out is that I was sort of a victim of kind of a political battle between the sports department and the corporate department there and everything. And so that didn't happen. And then nothing was really panning out. And I was pretty, I moved back to Monterey, which is where I'm from. And I was just sort of kind of disenfranchised because I wasn't getting anything. And I was pretty close to sort of saying, maybe this isn't what God has in store for me. Maybe, I'm supposed to do something else, and this will just be a hobby or what have you. And I sent a Facebook message sort of as a Hail Mary to a friend of mine who had been working at KMBR, the sports radio station in San Francisco. And I say friend, he's a friend now. At the time, he was much more of just a college acquaintance. I had gone to SF State with him, and I was like, I never do this. I hate doing stuff like this, but, I see you're working at KMBR. I've got nothing going on down here. If you hear of anything and you think that I'd be good for it, if you want to pass along my resume, that'd be great. If not, no worries. I don't even expect you to respond to this message. Not only did he respond, but he gave me like a full endorsement, gave my resume to the person that ended up hiring me at that radio station. And I didn't get the job the first 2 times I interviewed. I got it the third time because somebody was transferring in, so they got the job. And but the bottom line is he got me in the door. His name's Ryan Covey, and he's still hosting the San Francisco Bay Area right now, hosting Sports Talk. But that was, he's forever on my Christmas card thank you list kind of deal, So that was how I sort of got my start. It was a Hail Mary Facebook message being like, hey, if you hear of anything, and it was working. My first job was working the graveyard overnight shift, running the board, and editing highlights, in the evenings as well. So that's where I broke in, was in sports talk radio.
And what's fantastic to this story, I feel, is the sacredness of radio, right? And you had to literally jump through flaming hoops to do so. And you did it in 2009. I did it in 2003. That's when I went to broadcasting school out here in Southern California. And I mean, literally, it was like 10 to 15 years of interning. You're basically in a, squat house with other radio DJs, in some converted bar in Iowa, and hoping somebody, was driving by, and caught the signal and were like, why don't you come on to New York or Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Like what have you. And that was the case, and it's funny because the last time pre-COVID, like I walked into Best Buy with my 13-year-old. I walked and looking to my right, there's a whole like podcasting section where they have the mics and the configurations and everything like that. But like for guys like you and I mean, the fact that you could have essentially a station that wasn't FCC mandated, in your home or wherever you wanted it to be, it's just like mind blowing.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up like the whole podcast section too, because one of the things I'm most proud of is starting a podcast while I was at SF State called The Best Damn Nerd Show, or starting a radio show that would become a podcast. And that was sort of what we were doing at the time was very different. There was no Chris Hardwick then. And things like that. The MCU was just sort of approaching the horizon. So it wasn't this huge sort of nerd or geek pop culture boom yet. And so we did that show, but I remember when we moved off of campus having to find gear to buy, and multiple times at Best Buy being like, I guess I'll buy this gaming headset because it's all I can afford and hopefully this works. So, fast forward now that they have actual podcast sections and stuff like that, it's crazy to see just how far that medium has come.
Oh yeah, it's not just like they actually break it down to your kind of fiscal kind of budget.
Yeah.
Oh, podcasting under $100. Here's this. Bang. There you go.
Yeah, it's wild how far we've come. Whereas me being like, I guess this headset will work, hopefully it's got a good mic. And I go back and listen to some of the really old episodes, but like, oh God, we were doing it off of like really bad quality Skype. Like how did anybody even listen to this? But we're still going today. So, it's taken on a life of its own.
Well, that's a measure to you as well. I mean, your passion, and again, it's funny that you mentioned like, oh, the athletics, and it's weird. Before the advent of Facebook going live, that's where I essentially started my career. Before all of these kind of streaming services and abilities to stream, it was just like, man, it was like so tough, and tough is like not even encompassing like what the struggle was. But then I look at like what Rogan was doing back in 07, and I'm like, oh, okay, like we're kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You go back, you listen to old Rogan or old Bill Burr, and hearing the increase of quality and just all the bells and whistles that have gotten added over time. It's kind of, I guess the easiest thing I can compare it to is sort of like HD TV. Is like we all watch in HD now, but when we were watching in non-HD, that's just what it was. So we didn't know any better. We didn't know what we didn't know.
No, 1,000%. Which Yaz Beats, who's a podcaster in his own right, he says, James, for somebody that is just beginning to and thinking about starting a podcast, what would your best advice be for somebody who's starting from scratch?
Well, I mean, again, I think, figuring out what your budget is, figuring out what you want your concept to be, and a concept that you can be consistent with, that, your listeners that will find you, that they know that they can expect your podcast to be out at this time, and this is the stuff you're covering. So I think really fleshing out what you're passionate about, to the point where, because there's going to be days where, maybe scheduling conflicts or it feels like a chore, but that sort of care and passion will carry you through, like that, hey, I can still do this, and sort of, trudge through the times when it doesn't feel maybe quite as fun, because those will happen, hopefully not too often. But yeah, figuring out really what your concept is and what you're passionate about in talking about consistently.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I mean, it's weird because I almost don't do that. I'm very much like that, like pirate radio, right? Where like, hey, I might not have a podcast today or this week, but then I'll drop 8 of them all at the same.
But you get great guests too. So not including myself in that. We talked before we went on the air, but you get great guests other than me. So that's a credit to you.
Yeah, getting you as big as Josh Barnett, you can go ahead and print. So
very flattering.
I'm just saying, or even your cohort, your person, your commandant in terms of broadcasting on, United Wrestling Network's Primetime Live, none other than Bulletproof Blake Troop.
I love Blake Troop. I almost wore one of the shirts that he gave me to this, but I figure I'd jazz it up just a little bit more than that. But I love working with Blake, and he's been such a great supporter of when they brought me aboard at Primetime Live and Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, and same with TK, just really helping me fit into that group. It's been so much fun working with them, and that was going into, everybody in some manner or fashion has had to deal with what was 2020 and now early 2021, and just all of the trials and travails that have come with that. For me, because of Championship Wrestling from Hollywood and Primetime Live and getting to work with TK and Blake Troop and, all the great performers like Danny Limelight and Levi Shapiro, just to name a couple, 2020 honestly ended as one of the best years of my career. Getting to be brought on with David Marquez's group and doing Primetime Live and doing Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. I came into the start of 2020. I was doing commentary for All Pro Wrestling, which is, one of the gold standard promotions here in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's the promotion featured in Beyond the Mat, just in case you didn't know that. And so, I was thrilled to be doing it, thrilled to be doing commentary work for APW, and shout out to Marcus Mack and All Pro Wrestling. But because of the pandemic, obviously all of that went away. And I came into 2020 thinking, I was like, this is my year to really give it an honest shot to see what I can do in commentating and pro wrestling, and just what avenues can that really take me? I wanted to step up to the plate and take a few good swings and see where that led me. And then with the shutdown and everything, it's like, well, I guess that's that we'll have to wait till next year or maybe even beyond that. But then with everything shaking out as it did with Primetime Live and getting invited to be a backstage interviewer there and then a commentator, I would have never dreamed to get that opportunity when that pandemic was, in full, like the full uncertainty mode. I figured there'd be no opportunities, but to get some of my best opportunities of my entire career in a year filled with so much sadness and just difficulty, I am very grateful and very, very humbled that I got the chance to do that. And I'm looking forward to doing more because it's so much fun. I'm very proud of the work that we do there too, because we tell some great pro wrestling stories and it's top tier stuff. I'm very proud of it.
I love it. And shout out to the also friend of the show, Todd Kenley, the great Todd Kenley, who is commentated pretty much everywhere,
Yes.
So,
he's a pro's pro too. Like I said, bringing me aboard, showing me the ropes, sometimes doing a 3-person booth can be difficult, but he is the master. He's a great point guard, to use a sports terminology there. He knows exactly when to pass, how to facilitate, when to score himself. He is a whiz on the microphone. So it's great learning from him.
Now, obviously, we're talking a lot of wrestling, right? But that first gig in radio probably wasn't you talking about wrestling, right?
No, it was definitely not. And if anything, later on in the sports talk radio career, I was actually sort of reprimanded for talking about wrestling too much. And sort of something that to this very day I will go on social media. So if you ever see me share anything, be like, look at this pro wrestling reference from Sports Illustrated. That's interesting, because I got told in no uncertain terms, like, well, I just don't see the crossover between pro wrestling and actual sports. And it's like, well, okay, let me show you. And so maybe a little bit petty of me, but I like to point it out whenever possible. But no, my start was, again, working overnight graveyard shifts, running the sports radio board for our syndicated programming, and actually editing highlights mostly for the Golden State Warriors games, which were on our radio station at the time. And doing that and throwing myself fully into that and doing the best job that I could is how I ended up getting a job with the Warriors, because the senior broadcasting producer there really liked my work and ended up bringing me aboard. So transitioned from just sports talk radio to actually working for an NBA franchise in 2014, which was the start of their just incredible, unprecedented run in the NBA. I felt like sort of the kid in Almost Famous, being along for this crazy ride, and some of the things that I've gotten to do with the Warriors. It's been one of the best jobs I could have ever imagined. I've gotten to do things I never would have dreamed of, getting to go to China with the team and sort of experience. I never thought I would go to China in my lifetime, let alone the manner of which that I did. And so that's been a blessing in of itself. And I've learned a ton working for them, and a ton about broadcasting, because that's the people I work with. And one of my jobs for them is getting highlights from other games. So I'm literally listening to every broadcast in the NBA, and that's helped sort of shape my approach for pro wrestling. And I take from the best and work it into your own way. And I definitely do that. I work homages from our very own Tim Roy, who's the voice of the Golden State Warriors. When somebody goes up for a big dunk, he'll say elevation sensation. So me, when I'm doing Primetime Live or Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, if I throw an elevation sensation when somebody comes off the top rope, that's me doing an homage to Tim Roy, and I think it works in the pro wrestling sense. So yeah.
No, absolutely. And I've kind of liberally borrowed from some. I mean, the iteration of what's good party people or anything with party people, that comes from Kevin and Bean, and an ode to growing up in Southern California with K-Rock 106.7 on the radio, So, I mean, it broke my heart in 2020 where both Kevin at the beginning, it was Bean at the beginning of the year, or actually late 2019, and then Kevin Ryder unfortunately, I think around March. So it just broke my heart. Yeah, but
Yeah.
again, it's liberally kind of borrowing from, to quote a euphemism from a band, it's standing under the influence of giants.
No doubt about it. And I think if it naturally has shaped into your vernacular, then it's totally fine. You don't want to ever to feel forced, but a lot of this has become just sort of my own sort of dictionary to draw from. And that's why I like to use it. And Tim knows that I use this on the wrestling stuff, and he loves it. So I've got the seal of approval there. So it's good.
That's absolutely brilliant. Now, when you were, trudging away on the graveyard shift, did you have any direction? I mean, and it's kind of crazy too, because for somebody that was literally like working in the studio, but then it could seem like, the feat it is to, the broadcasting booth, even though it's like feet away, maybe in the same room, it could be literally miles and years before you might be there, if there at all.
Yeah, it is. It is one of those things like you're so close yet so far away kind of deal. It's right in front of your face, but you might not be getting those opportunities. And I think for me, I never was discouraged by that. I was always very sort of not flattered, but very excited or sort of enthused at any time that one of the hosts would let me jump on air just for, a few seconds to share an opinion and stuff like that. That's one of the beauties of working in nighttime radio, is that sometimes it's kind of the Wild West at night, is, they're looking for anything to sort of change it up, get some more voices on there. And so I always appreciated that. And I remember my early days at KMBR, the sports radio station. Every time that I got to go on the air, I would like save it and send it to my dad. And, I come from a very small town called Pacific Grove. It was one stoplight. So anytime somebody would be listening, like, oh my gosh, I heard you on the radio, it was always just very like, hey, local boy did good, But then as I moved on in my career, I became a network coordinator for the San Francisco Giants. And that meant working on the pre and post game shows, the board op producer for that. And the person that does that is a legend for the Giants, Marty Lurie. He loves more voices, and he loves people that really, know baseball and know sports. And so he and I hit it off right away. And so we would end up having some pretty cool banter on the air, and it just sort of grew from there. And I became a producer for the Ted Ramey show up there, and he was just solo. He's one of my great friends too, so that helped. But it was just him, so he didn't have a co-host. So I sort of became his de facto second voice on the show to sort of talk to him. So that was another sort of like level up, was that I knew I was getting more consistent airtime. Then I started doing sports updates for them as well, which was very fun because I love a good sports dad joke, any sort of play on anything that I can do. I remember it was a baseball trade deadline, and I did the whole thing using only Will Smith lyrics. I wish I had that saved somewhere, but that was one of my favorite ones because it was, I don't know why I did it. It just struck me, and it all worked at the time. But so yeah, at the start, it can feel very far away. But I would tell everybody, don't get discouraged. If you keep working hard and you have a good attitude, it gets noticed more than you even realize. And I really do firmly believe that, that your attitude of hard work and everything that comes with that, as opposed to sort of feeling entitled, I think will carry you far. I have to believe that because I can't do it the other way. So that's just what I would say to everybody out there.
I absolutely love it. Now it's kind of crazy because a lot of your obviously cutting your teeth in what would be your essentially the foothold to what would become your broadcasting career. A lot of it was kind of behind the scenes and editing and producing and what have you. Now, does it hinder or like embellish your experience of being an on-air person, because that now that you're on air and what have you, you have somebody, a young James Kincaid, basically cutting everything in. So does that kind of get into your head that like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that or whatever, or has it a little bit more refined your process?
Well, I think being a producer has definitely enhanced what it means to me to be on the air, and sort of has helped sort of hone my creativity of what will work on the air. And I think also when I came out of college, I didn't really have aspirations of being a producer. You know, it was just sort of like I wanted to be on the air, you know, and that's just what it was going to be. But in becoming one and realizing how much of a struggle getting anything on the, you know, being on the air, any sort of on-air talent job, I really learned to find the joy and the creativity of being a producer, and of, you know, like being that sort of glue guy that helps create, you know, the use of sound, the music, all this stuff that, you know, doesn't really get talked about all that much, but it adds so much to the presentation, you know, and to bring it back to a wrestling sense, you know, a great entrance, you know, the wrestlers doing, you know, all the work in the ring and everything like that. But look at a guy like Karrion Kross, who in my opinion has the best entrance in pro wrestling going right now. And so much of that's, you know, the lighting, all the imagery and stuff like that, the camera angles, that's magic, you know, and there's so many people involved in making that work. And I think that's sort of lost, you know, gets lost in the shuffle a lot of times, or not talked about enough, is that it does take more than just the one person to make that all come off and like jump off the screen.
No, 1000%. I mean, it's funny, and it sucks, you know, not having live, you know, whether it be sport or, you know, just an audience kind of participation deal, because like that's the thing. I often looked at shows, whether it be MMA, pro wrestling, or whatever, as this renaissance, right? Like you've got announcers that have their own influences. You've got the wrestlers that have their own influences, right? And different wrestlers or fighters, you know, throughout the card. Then you've got the photographers. You've got, you know, the people that are running the music and everything. And the feel of, and even the promoter, their view of this wrestling combat sports thing, right? You're basically seeing their vision, their budget, all of that kind of come into play, right? So
yeah,
it was this great kind of culture, you know, that would happen. And it's just like, of course, you know, safety first, but it's just like, it pings at your heart a little bit, you know,
sure,
that we don't have it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why I'm very grateful that we are starting to get some of that back. Like I said, grateful that, you know, going through all the proper protocols and everything like that, we were able to do primetime live and championship wrestling from Hollywood. And now with the NBA is back, you know, NFL's in the playoffs right now. And that, you know, fortunately, there haven't been anything, you know, too major in terms of setbacks on the pro sports realm since coming back and everything. I know baseball was a little dicey there at the start, you know, but they got through it, and we crowned a world champion. You know, congrats to the LA Dodgers and everything. And don't let anybody from up my way tell you that the World Series championship doesn't count this year. It counts. I'm a Chicago White Sox fan, and best believe if we had won it this year, I would have counted it. So, but it is, yeah. This pandemic, this situation has really highlighted to me too how important the entertainment industries are, and I include sports in that. The live entertainment sort of capital, the value of that is stronger than even somebody within it, you know, that I gave it credit for. You know, people. A show like Tiger King becomes a cultural phenomenon because that's all we had to sort of rally around and everything like that. It's crazy.
It is. But I mean, you know, that was a payoff. My goodness. It was so good. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a special place in my heart to the insanity that was the Tiger King.
Doesn't that feel like 5 years ago, though? It's so funny with this pandemic. It's like time feels like it's moving really fast. Like I can't believe it's 2021, and also very slow at the same time. It's very bizarre. We weren't meant to live this way. I'll say that.
I don't know, man. It's weird. It's so weird. But you touched on, you know, things like entrances and what have you, because like something that kind of just like stood out like a sore thumb to me, right, is the importance of an entrance, especially in the auspices of professional wrestling, right? Because I don't know, of course, Xavier Woods is, I mean, killing it with the New Day, right? And has done almost the better part of the decade, right? But you got to remember, his first introduction to WWE TV. Now, this is like sans the consequences create the former TNA tag team champion that he was, in another promotion. But I mean, Xavier Woods, his intro to WWE TV was essentially borrowing literally everything about Brodus Clay's gimmick, right up until the Funkadactyls.
Yep.
But
I mean, but now look at how far that's come. And I mean, the New Day is such a great success story, in my opinion. And I've been fortunate enough to interview all of those guys. That they're delightful. They're so much fun. A lot of great memories doing that. A quick aside to that before I get to what you were talking about, we were in New Orleans for WrestleMania, and we were at this offsite studio interviewing them. This is when I was doing In the Click with Baby Huey, and I did this whole big recreation of the Big E entrance, the intro for the start of the interview, belted it out and everything, and they loved it. And then the guy, the technical director goes, "Hey, we actually weren't rolling. Can you do that again?" And they were so mad. They're like, "Did you just hear this guy?" But I did it again. It was fine. But that was a fun memory that they appreciated, sort of my heraldry for them. But yeah, they are a fantastic success story because one, I mean, look at the amount of merchandise, just the fact that they were hosting WrestleMania. And I don't think when they were first put together that at all was the vision for them, but they were three guys that really clicked together, stood together and had their own vision, and they saw it through, and they took the initiative, talking to them about how they wanted to make sure that they had a lot of input for their merchandise after their, first t-shirt maybe wasn't exactly what they had in mind, and stuff like that. They're just a very, very cool success story, in my opinion. One of the, now in this great argument of one of the best tag teams of all time, phenomenal.
Yeah, I think they maybe there's a little bit of social tinge in there, but to me, in terms of a 3-man group, kind of pole vaulted over the Fabulous Freebirds.
Sir, I mean, there'll be Freebirds loyalists out there, but in the WWE, in what a 3-man group did in the WWE using the Freebird rule, I mean, the New Day, they are standing on the shoulders of Freebirds in a lot of senses. But they actually did it up at Titans, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, 1,000%. Which I gotta ask, man. I mean, did you grow up? You said you grew up Monterey-ish.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Monterey, Pacific Grove specifically is where I call home. But the Monterey County, I was born down there.
Now, did you get any maybe the San Francisco territory deal, or was that after your time? I mean, before your time.
That was more before my time. When I don't have the I know it was on, but I don't have the vivid memory of what channel I was watching it on. My earliest sort of memories of pro wrestling is Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage when I was very young. I remember being like, Hulk Hogan's great. Hulk Hogan's cool. Michael Jordan of pro wrestling. I was like, but I like Macho Man. Macho of the sort of what I call the classic 80s era of pro wrestling, Macho Man Randy Savage was my guy, and then as I got older, Shawn Michaels became my favorite pro wrestler and stuff like that. But I feel they're almost similar in terms of performance styles and storytelling and everything like that. So that all tracks, I think, for why I became such a big Shawn Michaels fan too. So that I do have early memories of, Hulk Hogan, let me tell you something, brother, kind of deal. But I couldn't tell you, what channel it was on or how that really came about,
See, for me, I mean, clear as day. Literally at the apartment on 901 Broad Street there in San Francisco where you are. And I mean, my mom essentially, it's a Victorian apartment. My mom going down and basically doing laundry. She basically thought she had put me to sleep before she went down. And apparently I might have heard the door slam or whatever, woke up. The neighbors are, getting her oh, baby, I could have been more than 2 years old, right? But baby's crying, whatever. And so my mom Fijian going, oh, are you okay? My child, Lovengu, right? And then she's flipping through the channels. It's Saturday night, and she's thinking that she's going to get cartoons, but it's again, Saturday night,
Yeah.
right? So funny enough, it just happened to be August of '87, Saturday night's main event, and it was Macho Man. Literally, like I was crying with every flip of the channel up until Macho Man Bret Hart. That was it.
Awesome.
And, yeah, and I can still call the match in my head. I remember it vividly. Bret was still a part of the Hart Foundation. I think there might have even been a run-in with Jake the Snake and what have you, but like it was just like everything that I was into. You know, Tom and Jerry cartoons, Popeye the Sailor Man, like it soon left. Like that was it. Wrestling was it for, you know.
It's funny, my dad will still ask me, you know, and he's super supportive of everything I've done in my career, including the pro wrestling, but he doesn't, and he took me to WrestleManias, you know, like he was taking me there, but you know, as I got older, he's like, you're still into that. He's like, what is it about it? I was like, he's like, you work for the Warriors. Like, this is real sports or whatever, you know, in quotes. And I'll say is like, imagine, you know, with pro wrestling, you're guaranteed to get a game 7. You know, you're guaranteed the drama, the like who's gonna win, all that stuff that just really like I love a good story, and pro wrestling to me is some of the best storytelling there is, and to be able to commentate on that and be able to be a small part of that story is really cool to me. And you know, just you know, being at WrestleMania 23 when, you know, Jim Ross went into the WWE Hall of Fame, you know, God, one of the greats in terms of being able to tell those wrestling stories. So I just that's something that's always drawn to me about it, and why I think that I knew I wanted to be a commentator was getting to help tell those stories.
So was it Ross for you? Was that your era of like kind of the pantheon of pro wrestling commentary?
I mean, he's one of them for sure. Gorilla and Bobby, Gorilla and Jesse is as well, you know, because for me, a lot of growing up on it was going to Hollywood Video or Blockbuster Video and renting all of the old WrestleManias and watching them over and over again. And in particular, WrestleMania 5, just hoping, rewatching, like maybe Macho Man will win this time, you know, like wanting him to beat Hogan in the main event kind of deal. And you know what? Shout out to Vince McMahon on commentary too. I think he's pretty good.
He's not bad.
He gets a lot of flack or whatever, I think, because of who he is. I actually enjoy him on commentary. But yeah, Jim Ross and the King, obviously for the Attitude Era and everything, were a big part of me growing up. I think Tony Schiavone doesn't get the love that he deserves. I think in terms of AEW right now, he's, to me, when they let him be at the booth, he's my favorite part of the booth on AEW. I think he's great. And back to the old WCW days, I really liked Mike Tenay. So I think there's been a lot of great, obviously, great voices throughout pro wrestling and beyond just those, you know, WWF and WCW and everything. So I just, there's been a lot of influences out there, but shout out to Tony Schiavone, who's having a great renaissance, and it's very well deserved in my opinion.
No, 1,000%. And I think, you know, speaking of underrated and shout outs and everything, I think a good shout out, a good amount of shout out should be given to one Court Bauer of MLW, because he's the one who actually brought Tony back to wrestling, you know, and then AEW essentially, you know, basically, you know, might have stole him away, you know, but you know, but that's it, you know. And part of my AEW experience, and I can only imagine what it must be for a casual just flipping across, you know, the TV on a Wednesday night, especially during quarantine, and you're like, wait, there's wrestling again on TNT, right? Not a rerun of like CSI some odd Miami or whatever. And not only that, but it was like, wait, I know that voice. Wait, is that Jim Ross? Is that Tony Schiavone? Is that Taz? Like,
you're so incredibly right, because I've had my dad stay with me a couple times during quarantine, and I'll put on AEW and he'll sort of stop and he's like, that's JR. I'm like, yeah. So he's still doing it. I said, yes, he's still going strong. And so like those is a smart move, because the gravitas in those voices, the instant recall and recognition is very powerful. So I think, one, they're obviously great broadcasters, but two, it's a great move, I think, to sort of legitimize what you're doing. And one other team I want to put over though is Matt Stryker and Vampiro from Lucha Underground.
Yes.
Loved how they worked together. It was very different than most anything you'd heard in pro wrestling, much like Lucha Underground itself was. And I miss Lucha. It was cool watching MLW this past week, though, that Mil Muertes showed up again with Selena De La Renta. So that was cool. But Lucha Underground was one of those shows that sort of, not that it needed to be reinvigorated, but definitely re-jumpstarted my eyes. Like, God, pro wrestling is awesome. I really loved Lucha.
Yeah, that that Vampiro Penta program.
Oh yeah, so good.
I will put that up against Hogan Warrior. I will put that against like anything.
That Cerro Miedo match from Ultima Lucha 1 is probably my favorite match in the history of the promotion that they did. It just was such a great story. Was it this 30 million star whatever classic? Maybe not. I still think it was very good, but it told a great story, and that's really what it's all about.
No, 1000%. Now I gotta ask, Yasmeet says, "I remember those days, Tony Schiavone and Jim Ross, as we all do, and
yeah.
It's a great memory." Now, as somebody that has actually gone to WrestleMania, I'm kind of heartbroken because I grew up after I left the Bay Area. I grew up in Inglewood, right? So I had never been to a WrestleMania up close, in person, and what have you. So I was actually relishing the fact that we were going to have a WrestleMania, and I was going to do it literally in my adopted hometown stadium. And obviously that got thwarted. Now it's 2023. But as somebody that has been to WrestleMania and that has, much like me, rented the videos on Blockbuster and Hollywood Video, do you have a favorite WrestleMania? And I know it's hard to pick, so we're going to break it into two categories. One, that your favorite WrestleMania that you'd love to watch back, like on video or on the WWE Network now, and then one that you attended.
Gosh, that's a great question. Very, very difficult to single out. I can tell you my favorite all-time WrestleMania match, and probably my favorite match in general. And this is the answer to the question if very often if somebody's like, why do you like wrestling? Like, if I could show them one match, it's WrestleMania 24, Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair, with Rick's career on the line. Because, and I actually did this during the pandemic. Somebody's like, hey, I want to finally try getting into wrestling. Like, what should I start with? And I said, hey, like, watch this match. And he watched it back. He said, hey, I didn't know who Ric Flair was going into that match, but coming out of it, I knew he was one of the all-time greats and got just such a wonderful send-off. That match, to me, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it right now, is so emotional. It's two of the all-time best to ever do it. They tell Rick getting Shawn in the figure four, like when Shawn does the moonsault and catches his ribs on the edge of the table, the sort of the buy-in that they get you is like, oh, Shawn, really hurt, probably was. And all these different things, that how they told that story in the match, right down to what everybody remembers with, I'm sorry, I love you, super kick, goodbye. To me, that's as good as it's gotten. And I know a lot of people would take, Undertaker versus Shawn at 25 or 26. And there's a myriad of other matches that are on everybody's top lists. That one, that's my one for me, because I think it answers the question that so many people ask, like, why do you like wrestling? What's so special about it? Watch that and tell me that you don't get bought into the story that they're telling. So that's my favorite match. And it might be my favorite WrestleMania because it's also a really, really good WrestleMania in general. Went to WrestleMania 19. That is very high on my list, because that's not the only, but that was the first Shawn Michaels WrestleMania that I got to see live, because he had to retire. I lament to this day that I didn't go to WrestleMania 12 in Anaheim to see him and Bret in the Iron Man, but getting to see him wrestle Chris Jericho at 19, Austin Rock 3 at 19, Brock and Kurt, a myriad of other. That is a great, great WrestleMania. But I think my favorite that I attended live is WrestleMania X7. in Houston, Rock Austin 2, and just being so full-throatedly supporting of Steve Austin. And I don't like that they turned Steve Austin heel at the end of that match, but I remember that night, I was a much younger man, than not caring. I think Steve Austin could have pulled a gun on The Rock, and I still would have been cheering for Stone Cold. I wanted Stone Cold to win so badly, so I didn't really care in that moment. And I've been at WrestleManias where there's technically been more people, but maybe because of my age and how the Astrodome was set up, I've never felt a crowd more than in Houston. I was like, whoa, this is a lot of people. And it was also my first experience with an adrenaline crash. We got back to the hotel, and I felt physically sick because I had expended so much of myself during that event. And that was a very new experience for me then. So I'd go with X7 for probably my favorite that I've attended. And all-time favorite beyond that, I'm a big fan of WrestleMania 5, in spite of the fact that Hogan beats my guy Macho Man. I like a lot of the classic ones. I love WrestleMania 12 for the Iron Man match. I think because of the nature of it, the rest of the card isn't as developed, but that's a very fun sort of new generation WrestleMania as well.
Minus 10.
Yeah, okay. And 10's great. I mean, gosh, talk about, you get Owen and Brett, and you get Sean Razor in the ladder, and the great send-off at the end. That's a great WrestleMania too.
Yeah, and again, I mean, to me, I think it's a precursor to what we saw with Daniel Bryan, a succinct storyline. I mean, that is, you can pretty much go and say that's a Daniel Bryan WrestleMania. That's a Hart Brothers WrestleMania. It's a succinct storyline all throughout. I mean, Mach basically hog tying.
Yeah.
What do you get this?
WrestleMania, if I'm not mistaken, too. That was his last WrestleMania match.
Yes, it was. Yeah. So it's just, to me, it's great. Which, I mean, you got to see Austin live. My goodness. And at a WrestleMania. What was that experience? Because again, I mean, I'm sorry, that he's the GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. You talk about pay-per-view, you talk about merchandise, any metric that you use to judge a GOAT, Austin checks out. And I mean, he's permeated that into, much like The Rock, into movies, not to the same degree, but still. I mean, and then even after every Monday night for the last couple of years, he's got a show where he's interviewing and stuff that. Just shows that the Austin brand is just amazing. So
and I think there's a cool sort of element to Austin, is he still feels like he belongs to the pro wrestling fan. He's still one, and that's not to we all support The Rock and everything he's doing, but The Rock is very much so The Rock in Hollywood now, but when Steve Austin does something, it's always sort of he's still Stone Cold. It feels sort of very much personal to us, the wrestling fan. And, looking back on, the fact, what an embarrassment of riches the WWF, WWE had at the time, to have both of them, to have the likes of Triple H and Kurt Angle and so many other just fantastic names. I mean, what a time that was to be a fan.
Oh, it's late 80s, not early 90s, or I mean throughout the 90s NBA. You're so many Hall of Fame players are playing at one time. You know, when you think about it, wait, the Utah Jazz never won a championship?
Yeah.
Stockton, Hornacek, and Malone? What?
They ran into that Jordan, Pippen, Rodman characters, so it's hard out there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's just, to me, that's the craziness of it. And then, I mean, the way that everything was structured during that time, a lot of people just they hark back to the Attitude Era as a reason why they don't watch today. But I mean, I kind of get that ethos, because again, from top to bottom, everybody was doing the suck it chat and the chops and everything. There was just so much of it. I don't think you could go around, if you were of school age, you could go to any school, again, from elementary all the way to college, and not spot a pro wrestling shirt of any promotion anywhere.
Yep. Well, I just thinking about even in my little town, they had to send out like a letter to the parents saying, and the students, there'll be no WrestleMania on the field, no suck it, no, like all these different things. It's just hilarious the impact and how prevalent it was everywhere at the time. And even go back looking at a character like The Godfather, go back, watch his entrance and listen to the crowd's reaction. Whew. I mean, incredible amount of crowd support. And I love looking at the old crowds too and seeing the number of signs and everything too, and just how bought in everybody was. And I think this, the cell phone has changed things a little bit with that. I think this sort of maybe sucked some of the energy of the crowd out of it a little bit, which is too bad.
Which I mean, I almost feel like the I guess pre-COVID 2020 or 2019 equivalent to sign is posting on Twitter that you're at said show.
Yes.
That's it.
But the thing is, like, without the cell phone, if you had your sign, you're amped up, you're trying to get noticed and everything. You're making the noise that is so craved. And it's interesting not having fans and calling wrestling with no crowd and being on a closed set and everything like that. And I, of course, miss, having fans and live events with, the audience and everything. But there is a unique opportunity, I feel, for pro wrestling in that is that now in a time where I think it's never been before, the pandemic, it was never harder to be a babyface. Certainly, in WWE, is now that they have the opportunity to sort of dictate the story without the crowd revolting. Is that they can just tell you this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, and I feel like the viewer at home is much more in line to go along with it than in person trying to hijack the show or anything like that. So there is sort of a unique opportunity there. I'm interested to see what happens when they're fully back. Will it be sort of more like the olden days where it's like, hey, this is who we're supposed to cheer and this is who we're supposed to boo, or will it go back to whatever, Cena sucks or whatever kind of deal?
Anarchy is it. So Yasmin wants to know who are your favorite wrestlers?
I said a little bit earlier, Shawn Michaels, my all-time favorite. Macho Man Randy Savage, right there with him as well. Those are probably the two. I love Kurt Angle as well. Bret Hart is undeniably just one of the greatest of all time. It's funny because growing up a Shawn Michaels fan, the Bret Hart fans out there, there's always like this back and forth between us, but it's like, I love Bret Hart. I just also like talking a little bit of crap. So Steve Austin's on there, also Mr. Perfect. Those would be a few of my favorites that I would say. And going right now, to who's going, I'm a big fan of Pentagon. I think that there's he in Lucha Underground was sort of like that Stone Cold Steve Austin level of, on a smaller scale, but it's like, man, he was really, really like getting over, like that gimmick was working. And, Ricochet in WWE is somebody that I really want them to push. I think he is so phenomenal in the ring. I don't want to see him get lost in the shuffle. He's so talented. AJ Styles, another one. And then of course, we have so much great talent in the United Wrestling Network, like Danny Limelight and the rest of the bodega that we talked about. Timeless Levi Shapiro, my broadcast partner up here in the Bay Area. I love his whole deal. As much as he gives me a hard time and everything like that, and tries to crush me with the claw, he's doing all the right things. So those are a few names for you.
You guys remind me of Monsoon Heenan, that dynamic.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Chris Dickinson, I think, is going to be, he already is one of the huge names to watch. But I'm looking forward because it's going to be Chris Dickinson and Mike Bennett to crown the United Wrestling Network's first world champion when Primetime Live picks back up. And something's got to give there. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I am looking forward to seeing that clash because those are two other names that I really enjoy calling their matches and seeing them work.
Yeah, Dirty Daddy. Oh my gosh, and a friend of the show. But that's he just. In many ways, is everything that I love about pro wrestling. He's a talented big bully Busick. Like he's got that build that you want, if you're a fan of the 80s, but he can wrestle, he can brawl, he can suplex, like he's just tremendous.
In terms of my favorite wrestlers, I give one more underrated one of my favorites from the Attitude Era. And, in theme with many of the names that you talked to, World's Most Dangerous Man, Ken Shamrock, was one of my guys growing up. And, he was probably, if I had to pick somebody that was my favorite Intercontinental Champion that never won the world title, it's probably Ken Shamrock. I mean, he's still in like better shape than anybody to this day. But I remember, back in the Attitude Era height, I was like, this guy's got to be a world champion and everything. Like, I loved watching Ken Shamrock.
No, 1000%, which I got to ask, and I know this is a broad one, but in terms of what you're looking forward to, and I know you alluded to it, a little bit with Yaz's question, or the answer to Yaz's question, but what are you looking forward to? Is there, whether it be what wrestling is, the concept of it that you're looking forward to it? Is there a particular promotion, a particular wrestler that kind of sets your heart on fire that, again, if you were to look at young James Kincaid, like, oh, he would be into?
I think going back to Primetime Live is something that I'm really looking forward to. Again, crowning that first United Wrestling Network world champion. Is that tournament was great. In spite of everything going on in the world, they were able to put on a really awesome, fun tournament. I'm thinking about Daivari versus Mike Bennett was one of my favorite matches to call in my entire career. That was just crazy. So I'm certainly looking forward to picking that up and seeing what heights the United Wrestling Network goes to, because they have some really, really great talent coming in and out there. And I'm so fortunate to be a part of it. So that's definitely something I look forward to. And then going to maybe more network wrestling, I'm really into Legado del Fantasma right now in NXT. And I think, obviously being a Lucha Underground fan, and, King Cuerno is just so good, but I love what they're doing with his character and just where, that could go. I hope they continue to give him consistent TV time. And I think he's making the Cruiserweight Championship in WWE more important than it's ever been.
No, 1000%. It's crazy. And the fact that, again, they gave a cruiserweight wrestler 2 heaters, that just shows you.
Yeah.
It's a cool dynamic.
Yeah, I love that. And gosh, I mean, I really enjoy NXT a lot in general. I think they have hit on something that's, it's the simplicity in the stories that they're telling. It's not very many stories they tell down there are too convoluted. They're easy to follow. And I think they get the buy-in from the audience. I think 2021, I think NXT right now is one of the best women's divisions of all time. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Toni Storm in particular will do down there in 2021, because I think she has, mega star written all over her. She's going to be big time dollars and big time box office. So definitely looking forward to seeing what she does.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I shout out to NXT UK. I'm just a big fan of UK World of Sport Wrestling, and NXT UK kind of ticks that box, man.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But I think it's a great time for pro wrestling in general too. I mean, the Wednesday Night War, which I host a show called the Wrestling War Room on the 10 Media Network, which is heavily focused on the Wednesday Night War. But with the preface, it's like, yeah, we call it a war, but it's like really an embarrassment of riches that you get to enjoy, so much good wrestling, on Wednesday night and throughout the week and everything. So I just really have enjoyed that. And I also want to say that, Randy Orton, towards the, mid 2020, the whole feud with Edge and the resurrecting the Legend Killer gimmick, that was some really fun stuff too. And then finally pulling the trigger on Roman Reigns to make him this badass heel character. I really think the payoff to that storyline is Roman Reigns versus The Rock at WrestleMania. If they can make it happen, that's the story. It's that I'm the head of the table. It's like, well, Roman, you're the head of a table in a mansion that The Rock built, and boom, WrestleMania. You have to have Roman go over, but that's the route to go, in my opinion.
I like it. I mean, I want you to book. I want so bad, because I'm a Roman fan, so I like your scenario a hell of a lot better. So I'm just saying. But dude, there have been so many people that have helped you both personally and professionally in your career. So I want you to get some shout outs out of the way.
Okay, so the person that I Facebook messaged to get into broadcasting, Ryan Covey, he wrote me back, didn't have to do that, helped sort of launch my career when I could have very easily gone a different direction. Jen Violet Kennedy, I said this when I signed off at KMBR, is that everybody in this industry and most industries needs their first yes, their first person that said yes to them. And Jen Violet Kennedy, my first boss in broadcasting, she said yes to me. And so I'm forever grateful to her for that. Ted Ramey, who, is one of my best friends, but beyond that, professionally saw enough in me to help me become a producer for a Monday through Friday show in one of the big markets in the world, on one of the biggest sports stations in the country. So that was huge. RC Davis and Tim Roy of the Golden State Warriors for showing that same faith in me time in and time out. And being such, Tim Roy in particular, for me is an on-air talent and a commentator, such an inspiration for me to draw from. He is really just one of the very best in the world. Jim Barnett, same thing. He's our color analyst on the road, NBA legend and broadcasting legend, Jim Barnett, and a great friend as well. And then, David Marquez, Nick Bonanno, John Roberts for showing faith in me to come aboard the United Wrestling Network and Primetime Live and being able to work with them, and Aaron Stevens as well. He's pulled me aside and just, told me how much he appreciates what I do. And that means the world to me, that they show that faith and that I'm doing a good job for them. That's all I want to do is do good work. I'm passionate about it. TK and Blake Troop show me the ropes at the desk for United Wrestling Network. That's I think that covers a good swath of and anybody else I forgot. My lovely, loving, supportive parents, my brother. Have always supported my dreams, and of course, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Faith is definitely how I lead my life. So I think I'll cover it with that.
Yeah, I like it. But you are doing so many fantastic things, and we thank you for joining us here at According to Woods. But to find out what you are doing, good James Kincaid, where can people find you on social media?
At James Kincaid on Twitter. I believe it's bimbo.jimbo on Instagram. That's a funny story in itself. Cody Rhodes dubbed me that mid-interview when he was dressed as Stardust at WrestleMania Radio Row. So that's where that came from. So yeah, and if you want to add me on Facebook, It's just James Kincaid. I'm pretty easy to find. And but yeah, at James Kincaid on Twitter and bimbo.jimbo on Instagram, which is where those are the two main ones, I guess.
Absolutely. Oh, and plug the podcast.
Yes, so I work for the Tenno Media Network as well. We do several podcasts. The Best Damn Nerd Show is probably the I would say the main one that we do. I've been doing that since 08 or 09. Started at SF State. It has gone through a couple different iterations, but we talk about a wide variety of things. Pop culture, nerd culture. Obviously video games, TV, comics, movies, all that good stuff. So it's the Best Damn Nerd Show, and it's a panel-based show that I host. It's a lot of fun. I'm very proud of it. The Wrestling War Room, also on the Tenno Media Network, and host DLC, which is Downloadable Cinema. It's a movie one. And so I do various things for the Tenno Media Network. So look up at Tenno Media on Twitter and check them out, because they are, they're doing a lot of great things. They're one of the big names in streaming fighting games and things like that. Tournaments. I've done work for them in Las Vegas and Japan for Evo, and they do some really cool stuff. So be sure to check them out.
Heck yeah, I will. I'm subscribed. And
Beautiful.
Yeah. Now, thank you guys for joining us here at According to Woods. Thank you, James, for sharing space and time with us. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and subscribe to everything that James is doing. But while you're doing that, I would definitely warmly encourage you to go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Yes, we're on Twitch as well. But if you don't take my word for it, James, you're subscribed, right?
Absolutely. And if you're not, what are you waiting for? No time like the present. Thank you so much for having me on. This is such a thrill for me. So anytime you want me, I'm happy to talk wrestling or whatever you like.
Oh man, I'm going to take you up on that, my
Please
friend.
do.
This is awesome. But we talked a lot about wrestling on the show, and again, if you don't take my word for it or James's, well, here's Pro Wrestler Zeta Zhang.
Hey, this is Zeta Zhang. Make sure you subscribe.